$2,500. That's what it costs to build one of Seattle's tiny wood shelters. A locking door, a real window, a mattress lifted off the concrete, framed mostly by volunteers and pre-apprenticeship students on a donated lot behind a church. Now, hold that number in your head. In Los Angeles, the same basic idea, a single-room shed for someone who was sleeping in a doorway the week before, cost $77,399. Same footprint, same locking door, same thin wall between a person and the sidewalk. 31 times the price for the same box. Everyone assumes these villages are a photo op. A ribbon cutting, a mayor in a hard hat, a news crew filming a row of pastel sheds before cutting to commercial. What they actually are is a math problem nobody wants to solve out loud. A cheap, deeply imperfect stopgap that now shelters people in more than 85 American cities, run in part by the very people who used to sleep rough themselves, and abandoned by the same cities the moment the land underneath it gets political or expensive. None of that is what the segment on the evening news shows you. Start with one file. Randy Gustafson is 68 years old, born and raised in Bellingham, Washington. He spent his working life planning a simple retirement. Slow down, maybe drive a semi-truck part-time, stay close to home. 6 years ago, he had a stroke. That single afternoon rewrote everything after it. He bounced between homeless shelters, a sibling's spare room, cheap hotels, and eventually a tent pitched somewhere in Bellingham he'd rather not have to describe to his kids. In January of this year, county workers doing the annual homeless count found him still in that tent. A month before a reporter caught up with him, a unit had finally opened for him at a place called North Haven. Gustafson is blunt about the assumptions people make about a man his age living in a shed. With 47 people at North Haven, he says, you have 47 different stories. People have different problems, different goals, just like in every walk of life. Whatcom County's 2026 count logged 840 homeless people, 435 of them with no shelter at all, up from 815 the year before. And Gustafson's file, the stroke and the tent and the slow slide, is not the outlier in that count. It's closer to the median. Nationally, the story underneath his is even blunter. People 50 and older now make up nearly half of America's homeless population, up from about 1 in 10 in the 1990s. Chronic homelessness among the elderly jumped 73% between 2019 and 2021 alone, and researchers expect the number of homeless seniors to roughly triple by 2030. This isn't a story about addiction or bad decisions in someone's 20s. It's a story about strokes, divorces, repossessed boats, and Social Security checks that stopped covering rent a long time ago. The structure Gustafson eventually got a key to traces back further than most people would guess. In 2007, a group of homeless adults in Olympia, Washington pitched a self-governed tent camp in a parking lot after the city passed an ordinance banning them from blocking doorways downtown. A local church took the camp in rather than watch it get swept. 6 years of fundraising later, in December 2013, that same community moved into 30 permanent cottages called Quixote Village, still self-governed, with residents voting on who got admitted and who got asked to leave. It proved a tiny, locked structure could work as more than a stunt. Seattle noticed. In November 2015, With more than 4,500 people sleeping unsheltered on any given night, Seattle's mayor declared a state of emergency on homelessness. Sharon Lee, who has run the nonprofit Low Income Housing Institute since 1991, had grown impatient watching permanent housing projects take years to permit and build. She partnered with the Lutheran Church of the Good Shepherd and an activist encampment called Nicholsville to put up something faster. Small wood-framed cabins built by volunteers and vocational students on land the church already owned. There was little information out there when we started, Lee has said, so we improvised a lot, refining the design with input from the very people who'd end up sleeping inside it. Leahy has since built 18 of these villages around Seattle. A year after Lee's first cabins went up, Amy King and her husband, who had spent 2 decades running a Seattle home building company, founded a company called Pallet in nearby Everett to manufacture a factory-built version of the same idea. We wanted to create something we knew we could manufacture quickly, that we could set up quickly, King has said, and we wanted to create living wage jobs with benefits for people in our community. Pallet hires people who are themselves formerly homeless, in recovery, or coming out of incarceration to build the shelters. Since 2016, Pallet has shipped more than 4,000 individual units into 121 villages across at least 85 cities. So what does it actually feel like to live inside one? Not like the press photo. At North Haven, a Bellingham village run by a scrappy nonprofit called Homes Now, the units are 8 feet by 12, hand-painted in whatever color the resident who built it chose, arranged along rows the residents themselves have named. ADA Avenue for the wheelchair-accessible units, and, with a straight face, Progenitor Place. On a hot July afternoon, the air smells like cut grass and diesel from a generator. Someone runs a leaf blower aimed at his own face just to feel moving air. That's Bobcat, the village handyman, who won't give his last name, but built most of the homes standing there. A short walk away, resident Del Dyke fires up the shared outdoor kitchen to cook breakfast at 2 in the afternoon for a couple of friends who drift over because the smell reaches them before the invitation does. Getting a bed here is not filling out a form. There's a wait list of more than 2,000 names for 47 spots. You pass a background check, then a meet and greet, where the people who already live there, not a caseworker, not a landlord, decide whether they want you as a neighbor. The fastest way through the line, coordinator Tina Hayes says, is to show up on a volunteer build day and swing a hammer until people know your face. Once you're in, you don't pay rent, but you owe 10% of whatever income you bring in toward utilities. For a resident doing odd car repairs for neighbors, that might be $18 one month and nothing the next. It's not a handout, Hayes says. It's a hand up. Small stability changes people in ways that don't show up on a spreadsheet. Someone who slept in 4 different places last week shows up different to a job interview than someone who showered that morning. Different to a doctor's office than someone who knows exactly where he'll be tonight. Different to his own children than someone who finally has an address to hand them. Here's the part almost nobody puts in the segment, and it isn't about the buildings at all. It's about the promises attached to them. Seattle's contract with LIHI required a case manager on site at every village, the person who actually connects a resident to a housing waitlist, a doctor, a job program. At the Wallingford Village, city auditors later found that requirement went unmet for more than 3 months, while residents lived there anyway. A shelter without a case manager isn't a bridge to anywhere. It's just a nicer place to be stuck. On top of that, none of these units have a bathroom or a kitchen inside them. Amy King has said as much plainly. They're not meant to replace permanent housing. They're a bridge, because affordable housing isn't getting built fast enough to close the gap. In practice, that means every resident, at every hour, walks across gravel to a shared bathhouse, a genuine dignity cost, and at some villages, in the dark, a genuine safety one. Then there's the detail that cuts both ways depending on who you ask. Hayes keeps roughly 20 security cameras trained on the property from a desk with residents' photos pinned above it. For Annie Carter, 60, who moved into North Haven after her husband's stroke cost them their houseboat and a stranger later attacked her while she was living in her van, those cameras and a door that finally locks meant she slept for nearly a month straight out of pure relief. For someone else, the same cameras are one more reminder that this isn't quite a home of your own. A day there has its own rhythm. Morning starts with the bathhouse line and a rotation of chores. Coordinators like Frank Jones, 45, who was hospitalized 3 times for asthma while living in a tent and learned carpentry and roofing helping, build North Haven itself, check in on new arrivals. Midday, those with jobs or appointments head out. Those without, like veteran Steve Crawford, 53, sidelined by multiple surgeries, take on odd jobs around the site, car repairs, grounds work, because, as Crawford puts it, I have to earn what I get. It's nice to still have dignity. Evening pulls everyone toward the outdoor kitchen and the kiosk, the closest thing the village has to a town square. By night, the heaters click on, the cameras keep running, and one of 4 rotating coordinators stays awake on site until sunrise, because a village made of 47 strangers still needs someone minding the door. Across the whole country, roughly 70% of North Haven's residents eventually cycle out into permanent housing, a number Homes Now is visibly proud of. Seattle's numbers are messier and more honest about how slow this actually goes. The city paid Lee-Shi $1.7 million in a single year just to staff case management across 6 villages. Nearly 3/4 of the residents at Licton Springs had already been living there more than a year, and across the entire city, only 33 people moved from a tiny house village into permanent housing in the first 6 months of 2018. Stability arrives fast. An exit does not. Back in Whatcom County, only 1 in 5 people eligible for permanent housing actually got a referral into it in 2025, and that was with $19 million already committed to the problem. The villages aren't failing to move people out. The door on the other side is just narrower than the line waiting to walk through it. So the obvious question follows. If this works, why doesn't it just scale until the problem is solved? Why did Seattle's Licton Springs Village, which took in some of the hardest cases in the city, get shut down in 2019 instead of expanded? It wasn't incompetence, and, despite a real documented spike in nearby police calls, it wasn't primarily crime either. It was a permit. Licton Springs sat on a 2-year city permit. When neighbors organized against renewal, the city let the clock run out, and the residents were dispersed to other villages. The bigger, more boring answer shows up in the receipts, not the headlines. Look at Lawrence, Kansas, where the city's 50-unit Pallet Village ended up costing $42,000 per cabin. Sticker shock that made national news. The actual cabins only ran the city about $1.1 million. The other $1.1 million, land purchase, demolition, buried electrical lines, engineering, fencing, was the dirt underneath them. Site and land costs alone ate 66% of the entire budget. The shed was never the expensive part. It's the ground you don't own, the utilities that have to be trenched in, and the fact that these units are licensed as temporary emergency shelter, not permanent housing, so a city can never simply let one stand and call it done. Picture the quiet image that leaves behind: a fenced acre in Lawrence, freshly graded, freshly wired, sitting empty for months past deadline. Not because the boxes didn't work, but because everything except the boxes took a year longer and $1 million more than anyone budgeted. Here's the thing though, the idea didn't die with that permit. It multiplied. Salem, Oregon, put up the same 64-square-foot pallet unit for $5,000 apiece. Grant County, Washington, replacing sheds at its open-door sleep center in Moses Lake, paid just under $8,000 for the small units and just under $12,000 for the larger ones. Portland spent $690,000 on 100 units, a $6,900 average. Riverside, California, put up 30 shelters for $17,000 each in about 3 months. 60 miles north, Sonoma County did 60 units in 10 days for under $22,000 apiece. And Los Angeles, spending nearly $48.5 million across 11 villages for 1,252 beds, landed at that $77,400 per unit figure, plus $25 million a year just to keep them running, or about $3,345 a month per shed. One company, one basic 64-square-foot design, a 31-fold price spread depending entirely on which city's dirt it sat on. The scale keeps compounding in stranger directions than city budgets. Pallet now manufactures around 15 shelters a day at its Everett factory and has held conversations about shipping units overseas for refugees in Ukraine. A homelessness fix from a Seattle suburb being considered for a war zone 5,000 miles away. Back home, Bellingham just approved a new Homes Now village on Division Street, 35 to 40 units on city-owned land next to the county jail's work center, with a Seattle nonprofit donating materials and labor, expected to open in early 2027. If you found value in stories like this one, the channel runs on people sticking around for the next one. Subscribing costs nothing and tells us to keep digging into the numbers everyone else glosses over. It's worth pausing on who you probably pictured when this video started. If the image in your head was a young man, mentally ill or addicted, alone, that's not who's filling most of these beds. It's Randy Gustafson, 68, derailed by a stroke. It's Annie Carter, 60, whose houseboat was impounded. It's Steve Crawford, 53, a veteran recovering from surgery. Adults over 50 are now the fastest growing group in American homelessness, and in Whatcom County seniors alone grew 14% in a single year. The face of this crisis is aging in real time, and the shelters are aging right along with it. Now the honest counterargument, because this isn't an ad. Critics, Invisible People and other homelessness advocates chief among them, point out that Pallet is a for-profit company selling to desperate cities at prices that, in Los Angeles's case, ran higher per month than the average rent on an apartment 10 times the size. They note the units have no plumbing or kitchens, that some architects have compared the whole model to the FEMA trailers issued after Hurricane Katrina, a temporary fix that quietly became permanent and substandard for the people stuck in it. They argue these villages get used to justify sweeping unsanctioned encampments, managing the crisis rather than solving it. All of that is fair, and none of it is invented. But the sharpest rebuttal comes from inside the same Lawrence Cost report that damns the model. Architecture professor Joe Callistra pointed out that skipping straight to full permanent housing for someone at the most vulnerable point of their life is not a recipe for success, and the numbers back him up in a way the critics don't emphasize. Seattle proved the box itself can be built for $2,500. Every dollar above that, all the way up to $77,400, is land, politics, and timelines, not the shelter. Blaming the shed for the price of the dirt is blaming the wrong villain. None of that shows up on an ordinary Tuesday at North Haven, though. What shows up is Del Dyke flipping something on a shared griddle for neighbors who wandered over for the smell of it. Residents clustered under the kiosk waiting out the heat together. Somebody's dog asleep in the shade of Progenitor Place. It's the most unremarkable scene imaginable, happening in a place built entirely out of other people's worst year. Tina Hayes, watching it all from her desk under 20 security monitors and a corkboard of residents' photos, sums up the whole operation in 7 words. It takes a village to make a village. So go back to where this started. $2,500 in Seattle. $77,399 in Los Angeles. Same locked door either way. What actually matters isn't the price tag stamped on the invoice, and it isn't the paint color on the plywood. It's the lock a person controls for the first time in months. It's an address, however temporary, that a father can finally give his kids. It's a coordinator staying awake till sunrise, so 46 other people don't have to. The shed was never the point. The point was always what a door that locks does to a person who hasn't had one in years. If you want to subscribe, do it because there's another one of these coming. A look at the 4 out of 5 people who don't make it through that narrow door into permanent housing. The ones still stuck on wait lists like North Haven's 2,000 names, and what actually happens to them while they wait.